Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm really glad you're all back. I hope you watched the first episode of season 4 a couple weeks ago with Mads Torgersen, and that was a really fun episode, and I really enjoyed myself, especially getting to see Mads. He's one of my favorite people at Microsoft, and so I hope you got to see that. Anyway. Today, I have Erik Jensen all the way from Denmark, where I was last month. And sorry, my screen, something's going on with my lighting. I'll fix it for the next show, I guess. And the cool thing, Erik also is the maintainer of the Entity Framework Core Power Tools. Which is, when I use Entity Framework, I have to install the Power Tools. It does so many cool things. And so we'll have an opportunity to talk to Erik about that. And anything else you want to ask Erik about, Entity Framework, SqlClient, or being an OSS maintainer. So start sending your questions now because they take a couple minutes to come through. And we'll get those questions answered as soon as I can with Erik. Which will be up in just a few minutes. So I'm getting really excited because I'm almost done with my presentations with the latest performance metrics from .NET 8. Next month, November 15th through 17th, I'll be in Lithuania at the Build Stuff conference. I've never been to Lithuania before, so anybody have any tips on what to do and anything there, please let me know. And so I'm really looking forward to going over there and teaching the software engineers about code performance. Let's see if we can beat the numbers from the Developers Festival, because I had a huge number in my session then. And something else I'm going to be doing at Build Stuff is something I've been wanting to do for a while. And so Build Stuff is the first conference I'm actually going to be able to do this. I'm actually going to do a globalization workshop at Build Stuff, a 3-hour workshop where you're going to bring in your code from work on your laptop, and we're going to start fixing it to work with any kind of locale or language that your application needs to support. Because in today's mobile world, I guarantee you, your application is going to have to support multiple languages and multiple locales. And I can tell you also 100% of the projects I'm hired to work on don't do any of it, or very, very, very little. And so there comes a point, in the future momentum of the project where, going back later and doing it is number one, very costly, and number two, very time consuming. And so if you just do it while you're coding, that's not an issue. And so I'm going to jumpstart these developers at the Build Stuff conference. So if you're going to Build Stuff, make sure you go to the description of my session and look at the pre-things I need you to do before coming to it, like bringing your laptop and bringing your code from work. And it's a couple more things. So please go to the information and see what I need you to do before you come in, so we can get the maximum output from those 3 hours. I have a lot to go over in 3 hours, and it's not nearly everything with globalization, localization. So I'm really excited that Build Stuff is allowing me to do this for the very first time, and so I'm really looking forward to that. In tech news, C# nears Java in popularity. C+, C# is nearing Java in popularity. I'm really glad about that, of course, because I've been using .NET since before it came out, and which kind of also goes along with a tweet I did earlier this week. And that's this one here, because I was looking at job postings and I see all these job postings for back-end developers, which I tend to be more of these days. And they want to write their APIs in Node.js and these other languages that I just don't think are as performant as C# is. And C# in .NET 5 was 10 times faster than Node.js. And so help more people get the clue, especially in some of the things I've been seeing in .NET 8. There's dramatic performance increases in .NET 8, which I think is going to blow away that 10 times number as soon as it's officially released next month. I think it's November 14th, so get ready. Also, this is the time of year when there's a lot of layoffs. I know there's one big company here, Qualcomm, that's laying off 1,000+ people, and also LinkedIn is laying off a whole bunch of their IT staff. So this is unfortunately the time of year when these things happen. And so to be prepared, or if you think you're getting laid off in the next couple months, please go get a copy of my book, Surviving the Technical Interview. It's made for you to help you prepare for the technical interview, because if you don't get past that, you're not getting the job. And so it's the most important piece of the interview process, if you ask me, for software developers. So go pick up your copy. It's available wherever Amazon ships books. And I appreciate that. I need to save up for retirement. Okay, with that, I want to bring on Erik. Erik is manages a number of open source data access tools and libraries, including EF powered tools, one of my favorites for Visual Studio. He has been part of the .NET community for more than 15 years and has been awarded the Microsoft MVP for 15 years in a row too. He also enjoys helping others with advice, blog posts, samples, tools, and in the .NET data access domain. Welcome, Erik.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Because I know it's kind of in the evening time for you, and so I appreciate you making time.
Yeah, no worries. Always happy to appear.
Yeah. And so how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Looking forward to the release of .NET 8 and the EF Core 8. So working on keeping my tools up to date, so it's like a yearly cycle of getting up to speed with all the new releases. So it's an exciting time coming up here in November. So looking forward to that.
I've been working on updating some of my books too, and this yearly release thing is really just too much for me. And so after all the work I've been doing on one book, this summer and into the fall, I'm only going to do books now on the official long-term support releases.
Yeah, exactly.
This yearly thing is just too much, and maintaining an open source library is hard enough, but doing a book every year is just insane, and so sorry everybody, I don't know why my camera is doing this weird glitchy thing, but don't look at me, just look at Erik, and everything will be okay. So I was talking to you before the show started. How far do you live from Copenhagen?
I live like 40 kilometers north of Copenhagen, and so I often visit customers in and around Copenhagen for work, of course, because it's we have a very good public transport system, so it's easy to get everywhere in the Copenhagen area.
Yeah, most countries have a good public transit system except for America.
I know.
Our public transit system here is just awful.
There's also a question about the distances are slightly bigger in between places in America compared to small Denmark, small densely populated Denmark. So yes.
My hotel in Copenhagen was, about very, very close to the train station. And I went over there, and I've never seen so many bicycles at a train station in my life. And so that's one thing I really liked about Denmark, is I felt that, you guys are really into, using public transportation more than, driving your own cars.
Absolutely. And also using bikes for commuting. is highly encouraged, and there's bike paths everywhere, and there's like priority for bikes, so they get priority lights and so on. So it's really a high profile, particularly in the Copenhagen area.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I saw more bikes on the street than I did cars.
Yeah, exactly. So we also have the advantage of being a very flat country, so that helps with the bike adoption.
Yeah, that's true. I live in kind of a hilly area.
Mm-hmm.
So even coming up my street is a little difficult for me at the last little piece of it. So but I really like you guys are really into sustainability. You know, your water seems very, very clean. You know, I thought it was really cool that, you know, the hotel I stayed in, you know, my key card was made out of bamboo.
Was it?
You know, yeah.
Okay. That's very sustainable. Yeah. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool. I kept it because I never seen a bamboo key card before.
No.
But yeah, I like that. You know, and you know, ever since I was a little kid, I've been into, you know, ecology and saving the planet and you know, and cleaning up trash and things like that. And so I was really impressed how well Denmark, I mean, at least Copenhagen area has done so well at that.
Yeah.
So everybody out there, if you have questions, please send them in now. You know, Erik, I don't usually get a lot of questions because of the time of day, but but so what do you want to talk about first? You want to talk about the power tools, or
let's just start with a little roundup of what I think are my important contributions in this area. So like power tools is certainly one of them. So I think my main contributions are the SqlClient toolbox, which is a Visual Studio extension for working with SqlClient inside Visual Studio. Think of it a little bit if you know a SQL Server Management Studio or a similar, but you can just work with the SqlClient embedded database inside Visual Studio instead. It's quite a popular extension. It has more than 1 million installs.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of daunting to consider releasing a new update to that extension because you know whatever you do, you're going to break someone. But but I'm really chuffed that it has all this adoption and that people find it useful if they're working with the SqlClient embedded database. And then of course there's EF Core Power Tools. The main feature of that is a workflow that I call database model first, where you are defining your database in SQL scripts, or you have a live database. You can have either, and then you can point the tool to your scripts or to your live database and generate context, DB context, which is what ties everything together, and classes that represent your tables based on each table gets its own class with properties representing the columns in the table, and you get all the mapping from the data types in your database, relational database, to the common C# data types. And once you've done that, and you can do that within a couple of minutes, then you can immediately start working with your database, interacting with it with the EF Core, and do link queries and add new entities and so on. I think it's pretty powerful, and I don't know if you know, but EF Core team itself provides command line based tooling that you need to install and then run from a terminal. Whereas EF Power Tools is a visual tool, of course, where you get options to select tables, and it will store the database connections you have for you, and also the tables that you selected the last time will be stored in a configuration file. So it's easy for you to add new tables or add columns and then rerun the tool, and then you get those columns included in your code base right away.
Yeah. That's, that's one thing I've always, really liked about Entity Framework, I started using Entity Framework before it, was officially released. And,
Mhm.
I never went back, because unless I had to, because I was working at a company, because, things are so much easier. And, but I do want to ask you, maybe some information about this, because I
Mhm.
haven't kept up to date. But one of the issues I when I talk about any framework and how much I like it, or some other ORM, right?
Yeah.
People always say, well, that hurts performance. So do you know of any metrics on, how close to like SQL performance any of the framework is?
Yeah, actually, this is quite an interesting discussion because a lot of people say, well, I want to use a tool like, for example, Dapper, where you
Mhm.
can actually, where you have to type the SQL statement yourself and
Mhm.
make sure that and also be smart enough to make sure that it's properly parameterized. So you don't risk SQL injection,
Right.
or
Right.
don't risk thrashing the server with hard-coded parameter values.
Yeah.
So if you're smart enough to do that, then you can certainly use a tool like Dapper. But there has been some really powerful improvements in the latest versions of EF Core that brings the performance for serializing, like taking 10,000 rows from a database and serializing those into C# objects. Uh, more or less the same performance as a tool
Mhm.
like Dapper, which can essentially do the same thing.
Mhm.
The only difference until EF Core 8 was that you actually had to define those classes that you serialized into had to be part of your DB context. So they
Mhm.
had to be a DB set. But with EF Core 8, that is no longer the case. It can actually take any arbitrary class in your code, and then you can serialize into that with a SQL statement,
Oh, really?
which is basically the same that Dapper does.
Mm.
Um, there are some extensions to Dapper that can do other things, but essentially EF Core can now do the same thing that Dapper does,
Yeah.
more or less at the same performance metrics as Dapper.
Oh.
Um, and it will. You can always discuss whether a dependency more or less is an advantage. Personally, I think it is, but so then that means if you're using EF Core and also want to just do arbitrary queries into C# classes, you can actually do that without bringing in Dapper now and get
Mm.
similar performance.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't, because of my latest positions at work, I haven't been able to use any of the framework in a while. So,
No,
um,
no,
yeah.
but certainly a lot of work has been done in the performance area in EF Core recently, also for doing updates and which in like in the entity framework classic time frame was really slow, because what
Mm.
happened was that if you wanted to insert like 8 entities, EF6 would actually issue 6 individual insert statements against the database.
Oh,
So it
but
didn't batch those. So it had a lot of conversation over the wire with the
yeah.
database.
Yeah.
Whereas EF Core will now do that in a single round trip, and that of course has a huge performance impact, particularly if you are in a cloud environment where there is usually some more latency than in a on-premises environment where where your storage system and your database server are extremely close to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, this
So
one tip I give in, I don't know what session or what book I wrote it in, but one thing I've been saying for as long as I can remember is that you want to minimize the amount of trips you go across the wire or the
exactly, it's like,
network,
and
right?
that is like that can really make a huge impact
Huge
on
difference,
performance.
right?
You can do a lot of other things. You encode and use the correct collection types and things like that. But those things are, of course, also beneficial, but if you're talking about database access, minimizing the number of round trips has a huge impact on performance.
Yeah.
That is definitely something you can sit and measure yourself doing really informal testing. So.
Yeah, I recently updated an article about so the first like real project I did with any framework was back in I don't know, late 2000s, 2010 timeframe, something like that.
I think it appeared in 2009 or something like that.
Yeah,
so, you were a very early adopter. Yeah,
I was using WCF data services and everything, but you know, the one thing that I did, because you know, for this company here in San Diego, I wrote their first public API system for partners, so partners could start adding value and doing other things. And then towards the end, when I was leaving, you know, I was actually, you know, I rolled into the system a way that, you know, whenever a partner would sell something through our app, we would get a cut of that, right? And so we were testing in that. But, you know, one of the things I wrote in the article was, because of this going across the wire thing, you know, going across the network, you know, one thing that I did was, you know, any partner that wanted to use our back end had to submit their code to me, right? And I don't care what languages it was written in, really, but you know, they had to submit their code to me, because the thing I was looking for was making sure, because I wrote in the documentation exactly how to do batching back then, right? And I said, you know, you have to do batching against the system. I'm not going to let you go across the wire 100 times when you could do it one time.
Trash the system.
Right. And I also rolled into the system where one mouse click, I can turn them off, right? If I detect that they're abusing the system, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want them bringing down everybody else because they're stupid code, right?
Yeah.
So very, very important to not go across the wire.
What we're saying here about avoiding round trips to the database from your backend server code, that will also apply to a JavaScript-based frontend. Same thing. That will also, if you have to do 50 API calls in order to render a page compared to a single API call, that will also have a huge impact on the performance, i.e. user experience in that scenario. So it's definitely something you should always think about.
That's why a lot of pages are slow, because they do so many calls.
So many calls
just to get the data, where they really should be bundling up into one, right? Or a couple even, but not like 20 or 30 calls in one page load. I mean, that's just crazy, right?
No, exactly.
So what else do you want to talk about, or are we done talking about that part?
Yeah, so of course the next version of EF Core Power Tools I'm working on, and it will be supporting EF Core 8. Not surprising. But I'm also working on I also currently have in preview a command line edition of the reverse engineering part of EF Core Power Tools, because some people, for whatever reason, maybe because they're on a different platform than Windows, maybe because the company is using some other development tools than Visual Studio, they won't have access to this extension because it only runs inside Visual Studio 2022. So I made a command line edition of the tool available as well. It's currently in preview, but I hope to make it releasable around the same time that EF Core 8 appears. And there you get all the benefits of the additional customization options that's included with Power Tools, but from the command line. So
that's cool. I converted my dev tool for developers into a global tool, basically, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and one of the reasons, there are two reasons I wanted to do that. One is I just am tired of dealing with UI stuff because it seems to change like every year, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I kept waiting for Maui to come out, and then Maui came out, and I'm going, I don't know, you know, and then you know,
Yeah.
so I finally gave up and did a command line tool so I wouldn't
Yeah.
have to deal with, you know,
Yeah.
UI too much. But the other reason I did it was because I wanted it to be run, so it could be run from Visual Studio or wherever else you want to run it, right? And
Yeah.
so, like in my projects, you know, I run it, you know, from Visual Studio. Like every time I build, my tool runs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So then it's really nice. It's a command line tool. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's
I had the same. I looked back and suddenly realized I had like 15 issues I had abruptly closed, asking for, well, can you support Rider? Can you support Visual Studio for Mac? Can you support Visual Studio Code?
yeah.
And so on. And I said, I can't because I just don't have the bandwidth to do that. But then what is the lowest common denominator? That's definitely like a .NET global tool. And if somebody feels that they want to build something else, a UI on top of that, then they're most welcome to contribute doing that.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing it.
No, not
So
especially
yeah,
when you're not getting paid, right? So
exactly.
so yeah, you want to
So yeah.
minimize the amount of work you do for
Yeah,
nothing.
indeed, and focus on the core value that you hope you're adding. So definitely,
Yeah. Command line works for everything pretty much.
it does. Yeah. So yeah. So the third thing I wanted to highlight is a little bit different. It actually brings us back to the good old days of Entity Framework Classic. So it sounds like you haven't worked a lot with EF Core. EF Core.
I have, but not
Okay,
for a number
not
of years.
recently. Okay,
Yeah, not
but
recently.
EF Core on the surface looks similar to the product that was called Entity Framework, but it's a completely different beast. If you ask the team, their vision for EF Core is more to bring forward the ease of use and the niceness of another API called Link to SQL, which came around the same time as Link to Entities or Link Entity Frame with the Entity Framework.
Right.
And Link to SQL was completely tied to SQL Server, of course. But on the other hand, it had some really, really nice features, and the link provider in Link to SQL was a very high quality link provider, maybe compared to the one in EF6. Partly because EF6 actually was originated from a project about relating to a new operating system from Microsoft, where they also wanted an object-oriented file system. And then
I remember.
this tool was actually meant to be like the search interface to this object-oriented file system. And then it, for various reasons, this always never happened, but parts of it then appeared as Vista, the operating system known as Windows Vista. And then they repurposed some of the intellectual property for this with Entity Framework. So you can say from birth, it wasn't really particularly designed to work with relational databases in any way. It was kind of retrofitted into it, whereas Link to SQL is built to that from the ground up. So those two products, even though they look similar on the surface, they each have a DB context and they have classes representing the tables. They don't really have a lot in common. So for Entity Framework 6, you can actually run that under .NET, or so new .NET, which used to be called .NET Core. So a lot of people have investments in Entity Framework. Sounds like you have done your part of applications in Entity Framework. And so they're often asking themselves, okay, now I have this .NET Framework 4.678 based application, but I actually would like to move forward towards .NET. But I'm a little bit reluctant to rip all my data access code apart and start completely from scratch with EF Core, which, as I just explained, is a completely different beast.
Yeah.
But then the EF Entity Framework team has actually made a version of EF6 available that allows you to run. It's a .NET Standard 2.1 compatible DLL now, so you can run it with .NET 6, 7, or 8. There's only one issue with the current implementation, is that it's depending on the SQL Server driver called System Data SqlClient. And that driver is no longer maintained except for really high risk security issues. And that in turns mean that if you want to use some of the new features of Azure SQL or SQL Server with Entity Framework 6 on .NET Framework, you're basically stuck. So it's things like, there's something called always encrypted. You can't use that with this older provider. There's a lot of newer ways to authenticate against the Azure SQL database using Azure Active Directory methods, like interactive authentication with multi-factor authentication, for example, or using something called managed identity, just a little bit like a service account, but within the Azure ecosystem. Those options are not available to you using that old driver. Microsoft maintains a modern version of the SQL Server driver. It's called Microsoft Data SqlClient, and it's open source, and it's available for both .NET Framework and .NET 6, 7, and 8. So what I have done is I have taken the current code base that was used to communicate with SQL Server and created a new driver that uses Microsoft Data SqlClient. So then that will enable you to modernize your application, maybe even port it to Azure and take advantage of the new authentication methods there, but without having to completely rewrite your app, but do a gradual migration. So this could be considered like the first step towards a migration to EF Core, is to gently move your code to .NET 6, 7, or 8, and then think about what to do with your data access layer after the fact.
And have you written, I'm assuming you've done this, but have you written like a blog post on how to migrate?
On how to migrate? Yes, I have.
Framework to like EF6 to EF6.
Yeah, I have some advice on how to use the driver. You can actually also use it with .NET Framework. So the first step could actually be to just adopt the driver, and then convert your code base to .NET Framework. .NET, I mean. Microsoft has some really good tooling these days, Visual Studio extension, for actually converting your applications from .NET Framework to .NET. So I always point people that want to migrate in the direction of that tooling. But I think the first step, so the first step could be that now I'm using this old driver, but I want to run my .NET Framework app in Azure, and I want to use modern authentication methods, but I don't want to change anything else. I just want to move my existing .NET Framework app into an Azure App Service on Windows. And my library enables you to do exactly that. And so you can do a gradual migration towards some modern .NET versions and get all the performance benefits and continuous improvements and features that are added to .NET compared to .NET Framework, which is now incomplete completely stale and nothing new is
Yeah.
happening in that area, as we all know.
So maybe I missed it, but does it, like EF6, does it use the new Microsoft driver or the old one?
No, EF6 currently uses the old one.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry,
But
EF8. I'm sorry, EF8.
EF8 uses the new one. EF Core from day one used the new driver.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, because they needed a driver that worked also on Linux and Mac and so on.
Yeah.
And of course, the system data SqlClient driver, which is part of the .NET framework, it only works on Windows.
Right.
So
right. Huh. Well, that's cool. And I, when you were just describing that, how do you find time to actually work for real? you maintain so many.
That driver is it's done. It's there. I hope I have a feeling it's making things easier for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I don't do a lot of maintenance on that because it's complete.
Yeah. So how many open source libraries do you maintain right now?
About 6, approximately 6. Yeah.
Wow.
So I have the SQLite toolbox, and then I have this EF Core Power Tools and the command line edition as well. And I also EF Core Power Tools also has spawned some NuGet packages that are related to it. Like for example, a NuGet package, so you can use EF Core command line tooling with a DAC. I don't think many of your viewers may not know what a DAC is, but it's a special project inside Visual Studio or inside Azure Data Studio these days, where you can define the structure of your database via SQL scripts, and then you can build it, and the output of that build is a DAC pack. And then Microsoft has tooling to deploy that desired state for your database against a production database. So I have tooling that can look inside the DAC pack and generate a EF Core DB context and related classes based on a DAC pack, not a live database, but a DAC pack file.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's pretty cool.
And
man, I'm behind.
I also maintain a tool not originally created by me, but I keep it alive and have updated it from .NET Framework to .NET, called SQL Query Stress, which is a tool for stress testing your SQL servers or your Azure SQL database for that matter.
Wow.
So you can say create a query that you wanted to run, and then you can say I wanted to run so many iterations, and then you can see how your server is responding to that amount of traffic.
Yeah. That's, tools like that are really important to me because, we all design databases, but until tens of thousands of people get on it,
Absolutely. And this tool exactly gives you opportunity to say, okay, what happens if I have like 5,000 concurrent sessions running this query against my database? Will it die or will it survive? Yeah. Exactly. So so I have a lot of downloads and on that one as well. So yes.
Wow, that's pretty cool. You just had me think of Steve Stedman has what's he call his tool on SQL? Steve Stedman, he's an MVP too, and he has a tool called something like the SQL something monitor. Why am I forgetting it? Because I really like it. But the one thing I really like about his tool is that it kind of tells you what's wrong with your database. It analyzes your database. It does a lot of things like watching your query speeds happening in live real time and things like that. But one thing I really like is that it will analyze your database and tell you what's wrong with it, and then it will tell you slow. Yeah, and then it will tell you how long it's going to take to fix and how much it's going to cost, right?
Okay, I have to have a look at that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And
Steve Stedman. Yeah.
Steve Stedman. Yeah. Whenever I'm using SQL Server, I always have his tool on hand because it helps
Yeah.
me with
Yeah.
those kind of things, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's free too. I mean, you can there. I think there's a paid version of it also, but there's a free version of it too, which for me, because I'm not a DBA or anything, is good enough for me.
Yeah.
To me, as long as I can see how long the queries are taking, that's one of the biggest things to me. So
That's definitely important. Yes.
Yeah, I remember even back in the early days of Entity Framework, you know, where you know, I never really wanted to learn you know, the Entity Framework language itself. So I just use, you know, a link to Entity Framework, and I, you know, especially in the early days, I spent a lot of time, you know, looking how I was creating the link queries in .NET, and then what SQL that turned into, right? What SQL was sent over to the database, and then I would change my link query, you know, to try to get the best performance I could out of Entity Framework, right? By just moving things around or using different methods or things like that. And so, yeah, in the early days, I did a lot of that work, just watching things happen, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of reminded me of the early days of .NET, where I spent a lot of time watching the garbage collector, you know, because
it was important.
Well, I never used a, you know, a system like that before, and so I really wanted to learn exactly what the heck it's doing and how it's doing it, and when it gets rid of things and when it doesn't get rid of things, and that's why I even had, you know, the guy who one of the guys who wrote the garbage collector at my user group twice, and so I got a lot of insight from him, right, too. And
that's very cool.
And but yeah, I think in the early days of anything, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it's doing, you know, because no one really knows, because there's not a lot of documentation or posts about it or anything like that, right? And so I guess my point to everybody out there is, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, look what's going on underneath the covers. You know, that's one thing I say in my technical interview book, is that, you know, there's a difference between coders and professional software developers, and the professional software developers are the ones who knows how it works, right? Who spends time doing, you know, things like that, like you and I do, to not only understand how Entity Framework work, I mean, how to use it, but actually how it works underneath the covers, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, someone's asking, sorry, I missed your, the only comment we got is, what are your social handles? So I'm assuming the one that's up on the screen is your,
it's actually
Twitter.
just Erik EJ on Twitter, and it's Erik EJ on Stack Overflow, and it's Erik EJ on GitHub.
Okay.
I was there very early, so I could
you got everything, huh?
could claim everything.
That's usually what I do. When some new thing comes out, I immediately go to it. Not that I'm going to use it, but just
just claim it.
Just claim my name before someone else takes it. Because, you know, I really, really wanted, I don't know if it's davidmccarter.com or mccarter.com or something like that. But mccarter.com, my last name is taken by, and I didn't know this until I was trying to do it, was there's a theater where they have plays and stuff on the east side of the country that's called the McCarter Theater, and so they took it.
They
know, so I can't use my last name because of them. But yeah, I try to do that just to kind of you know, even on Mastodon I did that, but I don't like Mastodon. Yeah, that I think that died in a couple months. I don't think most people use it anymore. So we got a couple minutes left. So do you want to talk a little bit about being a OSS maintainer, and, you know, what do you like or dislike about it?
As we kind of have concluded, I'm maintaining quite a few relatively popular extensions and NuGet packages, and I think I find it really rewarding to do that most of the time, like over 97% of the time. I find it really rewarding, and I get a lot of good feedback from people that actually find value in my tools and my libraries. So that is definitely one of the perks of being a unpaid OSS maintainer, just to get some good feedback and be aware that people appreciate what you're doing. But I think there's also as like a backside. What I don't want to what do you call that in English, but there's also some disadvantages. Sometimes you are approached by people that forget that you are providing something for free in your own spare time, because you think it's. I also do it to, like you say, I also do to become a more professional developer, to better understand what is going on under the covers. So I also do it for myself, to understand the dark magic of Entity Framework Core and the dark magic of Visual Studio extensibility and so on. I think I find those topics interesting. But sometimes people come and ask, why haven't you done this yet? Why is that feature X still missing? And that's something that you have to just count to 10 and then write a polite reply and say, listen, if you're willing to pay me my daily rate, I will be happy to implement it right away for you. I work as a consultant, so we can always arrange something. But other than that, remember that this is free tools. And if there's something that on the surface seems pretty straightforward, but is missing from whatever product or library, there's probably a good reason for it. Maybe because it's not as simple as it sounds on paper. So there's that, and but as I said, it's just a small fraction of the overall experience, and I'm getting slightly older and more mellow, so I don't get so agitated about it as I sometimes used to get. And maybe people sometimes users don't really do it in bad will, but they just tend to forget that this is actually a piece of free software supplied by somebody in their spare time. So.
I think people might be a little more agitated or something because they're trying to work on something they need to get done right away, and then there's something missing, and oh my gosh, why isn't it there? I need to get this done, kind of thing. And well, my reply to all of them would be, you do it and submit a pull request.
Exactly. That's what I often apply. If they're asking for something that I haven't even thought about, well, either say, okay, that's completely out of scope, or if it sounds interesting, be my guest, create a pull request, and I'll be happy to have a look at it. And then mostly you hear crickets after that.
Of course, because they want to do it, right? That's so one of the things I've been doing this summer and is I've been doing a lot of a small blog post on my site about explaining more in detail than Microsoft does these code analyzer violations, right? And not only why you have the violation, but how do you fix it? And here's the setting for the editor config file. So I've been writing, I don't know how many of those things I've written. I've lost count, right? And I usually use to come up with that data and come up with sample code. I usually use projects where I used to work, but I kind of ran out of stuff on that, and so I pulled down a copy of EF Core, and I started applying my editor config file, which is the most comprehensive of anybody, to EF Core, and I'm finding some perf stuff. And so one of my one of my plans, as soon as I get done, probably
You
with
should
going to,
you should do a pull request.
yeah, I think when I
Discuss
get
it
back from,
as
when I get back from Lithuania, I'm going to start doing pull requests and start fixing these little, like little perf thingies that, Microsoft just never did for some reason. And I'm just going to say, yeah, I want any framework faster. And so I'm going to make the change myself.
One piece of advice, if you want to do that and don't want to get it rejected right away, you have to provide a benchmark.net piece of code that demonstrates the performance difference.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
that's a good thing, because
yeah,
and that's what
just
I
so
use.
You know it. Yeah, but of course, just so you know it, because otherwise it will just say, well,
prove it.
Your claim. That's your claim. Prove it. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, like the one I'm thinking off the top of my head is there's sometimes when you're looking for a string, and I forget the actual method off the top of my head. I don't know if it's contains or something, but a lot of people, if they're looking for like the letter A, right? They put the letter A in double quotes on both sides.
Yeah,
right.
It's much better to use a char.
Right, or char or single quotes, right? And and it's actually, it is a performance difference, right? And so those are the little things that I've been finding in any framework, is those little things here and there. Right? Yeah. So anybody out there, if
I will keep an eye on give some thumbs ups to your pull requests when they're coming.
I'm a little worried because I've only worked on one. I actually did work. I think I only did a couple things on it for the VB driver for Entity Framework. But I never got back to that. But and I never had to go through the whole pull request process. I was working with the guy, the PM from the team or something, and so I didn't have to do all that. But yeah, I've got to figure out how to properly do all this so Microsoft won't reject my pull requests and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of pull requests accepted, but I mean you need to add, particularly if it's performance pull request, they want you to prove that is actually making a difference.
No, I agree. They don't want to introduce something that has no benefit if they can't prove it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why I tell everybody that if you haven't used benchmark.net, you need to start learning how to use it. And because that's really the only way to tell how fast your code is really running, right? Without doing something like monitoring the live site or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so and I even and to make it easy on people, I actually have a library for benchmark.net,
okay, like to make it even easier.
To make benchmark.net even easier. And and because basically what I did was all the common class, I was starting to write benchmarks for multiple projects, and I'm going, well, I'm doing the same thing over and over again.
Over and over. Yes.
So why not just make a library out of it? So in my library, I actually have a class called benchmark that has all the attributes that I use in all my tests. And, basically everything is rolled up in there for me to, to get a benchmark project started now is just so easy now.
Very easy. That sounds good.
Well, I better let you go. That was a great discussion. I enjoyed talking about any framework. It's been a long time since I've talked about any framework. And so I'm glad to talk about it again, because it's, like I said, it's one of my favorite tools that Microsoft has come out with in the last, 15 years or whatever has been now. That's that long already.
That together with Link is really makes a big difference for .NET, I think. So definitely.
Yeah, Link was another dramatic difference in .NET. Yeah, you're right. So is there anything else you want to plug before we go?
I've done my best. I don't think I can do anything else.
Okay, so before I let you go, I'll ask the question I ask all my first-time guests. because I ask this because there's more to life than coding or maintaining an open source library. So
Agreed.
what do you do for fun that's none of those things?
Well, if you look behind you,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see it. I collect and read comic books. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, so that's part of what I do in my spare time. So yeah, and I really enjoy that. There's always something new coming out. So yeah.
Yeah. Have you watched the Amazon show Generation V? I think is that what it's called, Generation V?
No, I don't have
Oh my,
Amazon.
it's crazy. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay.
I like any superhero show where they curse, right? That's
Mhm.
my favorite thing,
Yeah,
because most
they're too
comic stuff,
polished.
they don't curse, there's no
No,
sex. No,
no.
there's a lot of cursing, a lot of sex in this. So
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
sure if I should be saying that on my show, but
But now you did.
yeah. Oh well.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well,
No,
thanks. You can hang out
if-
afterwards if you want, but I really appreciate you being on the show for the first time, and hope to have you back sometime in the future and talk about whatever you're up to.
thanks a lot, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. That was a great discussion. Like I said, I kind of miss NAD framework. I haven't used it in a while, and I think I was actually thinking a week or two ago that I need to come up with something so I can use NAD framework again. But we'll see. All right. That was a great session with Erik. I enjoyed that. So here's your geek humor for today. I actually was watching a new show on Apple TV about chemists, and so this kind of reminded me of that, where the scientists or chemists, sir, it finally worked. Great job. Now we need to figure out why. That's exactly how science works, right? Programmers, sir, it finally worked. It's a miracle. Don't ever touch it again. Yeah, that is so true in our world. I thought it was funny. I don't know if you guys do, but I think that's funny. All right, as usual, help me help the kids from the Delhi in India. I visited the Voice of Slum a year ago, now last year, and brought computers and hung out with the kids and Dave and Chandy, and Dave and Chandy do a wonderful job, help supporting these kids with not only clothing and food and school, but also vocational training that some of the support from my book has helped out with. And so if you can, please go to voiceofslum.org and donate whatever you can. You can donate money, you can buy school supplies, things like that. But please go and help them, because there's a lot happening in this world, and everybody needs our help, and this is one of the ways you can help. And if you do, I'll be really happy, because I really like that organization. All right, thanks for watching. My next show in a couple weeks will be November 4th with Maddie Ledger. Is probably you guys know her more from Microsoft. I'm excited to have her on. I've been trying to get her, and actually someone else I'm having on in December for a while. So I'm really glad that I've been able to get them on. As always, please donate blood at your local blood bank. I did a couple weeks ago. And actually, November 1st, I'm going to be participating in a study where I get hooked up to a machine and both my arms get needles put in it. And they go through my blood for 3 hours and pull out white blood cells, which they're testing in very serious cancer patients with really, really great results. And so I'm really happy I can help out with that. It's not an easy thing to be strapped to a chair for 3 hours and not be able to move or drink or eat or anything. But what they're getting out of this is amazing, and so I'm always willing to help out with things like that. All right. Always email your suggestions, including who you want me to have on the show, how you like the show, what do you want me to talk about on the show. Please send those ideas to dotNetDave@live.com. And with that, I'll see you in a couple weeks. Simon must be in the bathroom. Simon.